It's 11 a.m., so I'm just going to go ahead and get started for us today, everybody. Hello and welcome. I am Danny Wilcutt. I think I know some of you actually have seen in here. I am the training specialist for Omeka, and I will be leading our discussion today. And so today's topic is going to be on sustainability, and you're going to see that that's coming in many forms as far as how we're talking about that. And we'll also see that there is in the chat, there's a link to our agenda. And so please take a look at that. Some of you already are, but please go ahead and put your questions right in there. And so then we can prepare. We know what we're going to answer in a little bit, and that will just help things move smoothly as we go. And so, as always, thank you for joining us. And my apologies if there's some background noise here. I'm trying to enjoy the outside. Um, but that's okay because I'm not talking too much today. And so I guess without further ado, just so we can keep this going, I think we should just jump into our first presentation, which I believe I lost my agenda page here, but I believe it's going to be, oh, Sharon and Ken.
You want to unmute?
Yep.
Okay. We appear to have lost our video here.
Try again.
Yep, there's Ken. Okay. All right. I'm gonna use.
Just keep it.
Don't worry about it.
I turned my audio off.
Okay, audio's off, but I'm still echoing. All right. Anyway, welcome, folks. We're going to talk a little bit today about sustainability and thinking about sustainability in a number of different ways. And let's see if my camera is working. Anyone?
Yes.
It is. Okay. Thinking about sustainability in a number of different ways. So certainly we can think about sustainability as the longevity of the project, right? Can you create an installation with Omeka Classic or Omeka S that lives for quite some time into the future so that your work is accessible and those sorts of things. But of course, sustainability also means thinking about sunsetting projects when time comes for that. And so we want to think about, I'm going to talk about, at least for today, things that you can do at the front end of creating your project that will make sustaining the project and the work that goes into the project easier moving into the future. So I'm going to share my screen here for a moment. One of the ways to think about making your materials as sustainable as possible is to take into account the fair data principles when one thinks about describing one's digitized materials. And for those of you who are not familiar with the fair data principles, FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And so considering those things when one is getting ready to describe materials in Omeka is a really helpful sort of checklist. And there are a variety of different ways in which Omeka Classic and Omeka S respond to these principles. In the notion of data being findable, one of the most important features there is having a persistent identifier for your materials. And that is really easy in the Omeka S universe with the persistent identifier module that allows you to have an ARC through EasyID or your own installation, or a DOI through DataSite and those sorts of things. Persistent identifiers aren't available at the moment for Classic, but the software itself produces a URL that is not changing. Lots of the other elements about findability depend on using descriptive standards that are keyed to your community. And so Omeka Classic tried to solve this problem very early on in the architecture of the software by demanding that users start with Dublin Core to set a baseline of a descriptive metadata standard that would be interoperable across lots of different platforms. And it was a standard that was recognized by library systems, recognized by museum systems, all of those sorts of things. Omeka S gives us lots more flexibility in this realm because of the ability to use any linked data vocabulary, but that vocabulary should be attuned to your community so that the description is findable and is in a format that is recognized by your colleagues. We represent this material in both cases as, well, at least in Omeka S, as JSON LD. You can register your data in a data repository if you have it. Europeana has a data repository data model that serves the European Union. Woe that the United States was that coordinated that we had one. We don't. For a moment, we thought DPLA was going to help us with that, but it's not. Accessibility is a much easier to answer demand in the Omeka universe, and that's because both Omeka Classic and Omeka S operate on the open web, so HTTPS through a web browser, but also both have REST APIs that mean that materials are available with a protocol that authenticates and all of those sorts of things. And one of the questions about accessibility is, will that metadata still be there even if the files or the object of that metadata goes away? And that is, of course, your decision as a user, but the data is there, and it can continue. Is the metadata interoperable? This is always, again, a question that is a concern for the Omeka team. Both Omeka Classic and Omeka S have standard output formats that include JSON LD. In the case of S, we've got triples, notation 3, RDF XML, turtle, those kinds of things. But Omeka Classic has a set of standard outputs as well that mean that data is standardized in the way that it's produced. Lots of the other questions about metadata really are based on what are the standards of your community. And so when FAIR asks us to use vocabularies that follow FAIR principles, that could mean using the value suggest modules. It could mean using the Library of Congress subject headings and those sorts of things. But it will depend on what the context is in which you are working. Now, the question of reusability is really very key, and it's probably the question that we're going to talk most about in this hour, because not only do we want to create metadata that describes our materials in ways that are standardized, but we also want to make that material available so that other people can reuse it. You're going to hear some from Jim about some plugins and modules that make that possible. But again, this is a question of keying your description to community standards. But of course, preparation of data and the formation of your metadata, though carefully considered, is not the whole shebang with sustainability. Other things happen just sort of thinking about considering your installation process. Omeka Classic and Omeka S both run on LAMP servers. That means that periodically PHP versions become deprecated and we move on to new ones. And that means that you need to update. And so paying attention to that cycle of version updating is really important. We do our best to make the updating process as seamless as possible, and to pay attention to those deprecation deadlines and things like that. But your obligation as a user is to keep up with those kinds of updates. That means that your core system is safe and secure, but there are a couple of other things that you can do to make that update process even, well, slightly easier. And that is that even if you have functionality that exists outside the core that maybe we don't have a module or a plugin for, please, please, please don't edit the core files. Make a module or a plugin that contains that additional functionality so that you can seamlessly update the core and then separately update your modules. When you're thinking about using a module that maybe is not produced by the Omeka team, because we guarantee the upgrade and compatibility of ours, but something that might be created by one of our users. And here I have the banner module for Omeka S by Channing Norton. You might want to click through to GitHub and say, like, is this developer active? I'm not going to say, has this module been updated lately? Because sometimes they don't need to be updated. But the fact that this developer, and you roll right on down to the bottom of the individual's page here in GitHub, and you can see that Channing's like regularly making commits and working in the world, which might mean that if you have a question, you might actually be able to get an answer. This is also true on the theme front. You may be tempted to make edits directly to the themes, whether they come from from the Omeka team or other teams. Would urge you, please don't do that, because it makes upgrading harder. What we would like to see is probably the easiest thing for everyone is to use the CSS editor plugin to contain those updates, or to use add additional template files or things like that, rather than directly editing the themes, so that they're easy for you to run your upgrades, get new versions of your modules and plugins, get new versions of your themes, and then apply your changes so that things continue to run and move forward. So we're thinking about this in the role of sustainability and preservation, is a model that is tuned to continual upgrade as opposed to emulation, where you encapsulate an installation in a Docker or an environment where it continues to run what it started on. We try our best to make it possible for you to roll forward with us. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it off to Ken.
I'll see if.
Let's use mine.
Okay.
All right, Ken's going to use my mic just in case.
So I'm Ken Albers. I'm the Omeka Services Manager, which means I'm kind of overseeing.
Turn on your camera.
Oh,
There you go.
overseeing the various services that we offer to users, such as support, consulting, custom theme development, custom module development or plugins, and hosting. And sort of what we encounter a lot with users, clients, etc., is as far as sustaining their Omeka project long term, there seem to be sort of three main aspects of that: money, time, and technical expertise. Of course, we can't help with the money, unfortunately, but the time and the technical expertise, we certainly can, and that sort of drives a lot of what we do with our hosting options. Omeka.net, we have an upcoming shared Omeka S hosting option, and we do a managed hosting option, which is not a shared server environment and things like that. But with all of those, we handle the installation, the maintenance, etc., of all of our software that we offer. So essentially, we take that time and technical expertise portions out of the equation for users who do choose to host with us. So that's sort of one aspect of what we offer as far as sustainability goes. But we also somewhat recently, last year or two, started offering something even with sustainability even greater in mind, and it's a sustainability hosting option. A lot of this grew out of there started to be more and more ideas going into grant proposals about how is this project going to live beyond the time frame of the grant, right? So a lot of grants, it's, you know, some set amount of time, 1 to however 3, 4, 5 years, where it's an active project. People are working on it, they're adding materials, etc. But after that, it's sort of done, right? So the materials are all in the site, the exhibits are built, but people want it to continue to exist. And a lot of times that's where they run into some of the issues Sharon just sort of touched on, right? So the server it's on has a new version of PHP and it no longer works with the version of Omeka, and they don't know how to fix that, and so on and so forth. And so or some library or dependency is no longer available or has been updated, etc. So what we came up with and was an idea that we could freeze the site as it exists in that moment. There's no more admin access, nothing can be updated, but that site will continue to function as it did on the last day of its active mode, if you will. And so this is all something that other Omeka users do on their own. You can do this, for example, we see people doing it with Docker, things like that, where they wrap it up and then they just continue to serve it. We're just sort of, again, taking the technical aspects of doing something like that out of your hands when we do it. But this is similar to everything with Omeka, all stuff that you can do on your own if you do have the time and technical expertise to do it. So these are some of the things that we're thinking about as far as things we can do, opportunities we can afford people. The other aspect of this is that, and this is something, again, people are doing on their own, but we do it as part of the service we offer, is that in addition to the long-term hosting, we provide some artifacts that you can put into a long-term repository. So for example, like a server image in the database or a work crawl of everything that's in there. And then, of course, you've got to find a place for that to go, whether that's something that, again, you support on your own, or there's a university or an organization that does this sort of stuff. For example, Knowledge Commons, I think, is one of the ones that does this. But I'll say that these are sort of some of the things we're thinking about as far as long-term sustainability of Omeka sites, and ways that we can support users in that process.
All right. So one of the things that is involved with some of the stuff that Ken just talked about, and some of the things that I was speaking about regarding fair data and principles, includes the creation, as Ken suggested, of these sort of preservation artifacts. And so, the line between sustainability and preservation is pretty fuzzy. And we have Jim, really, who I'm going to hand this off to, has worked really hard to create a set of plugins and modules that produce things that could be seen as sustainability path artifacts or preservation artifacts. And so we're going to hand it over to Jim to talk about both the static site export plugin slash module and exports generally. Camera on, Jim. Can you unmute?
Yes,
There
sorry.
you go. Great.
Hi, everyone. Yes, thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Ken. Let me share my screen. Are you seeing my screen right now?
No.
Not yet.
No.
Let's see.
There we go.
All right. Okay. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Jim, a software developer for Omeka, and I'll be showing you a couple of tools built for sustainable collections. When we say sustainability, we often focus on keeping software running. I want to spend a few minutes on the other half of that, the fact that nothing runs forever. So the real question isn't whether the software lasts. It's whether your collections can outlast it. If you ever had to move on, could you take your collections with you and still use them? And that's exactly the question we built these tools around. For your collections to outlast the software, it comes down to two things. First, your data has to be free to travel, not trapped inside one system, but something that you could take elsewhere. We call that portability. Second, your public collections, the sites people visit, have to stand on their own with no application running underneath them. And Omeka has a tool for each available for both Omeka S and Omeka Classic. The first tool is exports. It's a data exchange tool. It takes the data in your collections and writes it out to a plain open file that other systems can read. You choose what you want, everything or just a slice of it, and you get a standard file back, CSV or JSON LD. Here's one of those files, a CSV open in a spreadsheet. Nothing special is needed to read it. No Omeka, no database, no login. It's the complete structured record of your collections, sitting in a file anyone can open. Every record links to its media files too. The files themselves are yours to carry right alongside the data. And that's portability, its own kind of sustainability. These are open standard formats, not tied to Omeka or any one company. So if you ever move to a different system, your data goes with you. And it's good for more than moving. Hand it off to an institutional repository or a data archive, run analysis across your whole collection, or just keep it as your safety copy. This is data you could still open in 15 years on a computer that's never heard of the software. The substance of your collections isn't locked inside one application's database anymore. It's yours to take anywhere. The second tool is static site export. Where the first module lets your data travel, this one lets your public collections stand on their own. It does what the name says. From inside Omeka, with just a few options, it packages up your whole public site. From there, you build the package into a static site with Hugo, a free open source tool, then host it on almost any web server. And that static site is just files. The pages, the descriptions, and the media files themselves, all in one self-contained folder. No database behind it, no Omeka underneath it. And that's why it lasts. A folder of files costs almost nothing to keep online, and there's almost nothing to maintain. It can outlive the project that made it, the grant, the staff time, the budget. And here's that site up and running in a browser. It's a faithful recreation of your site. It captures the layout and the experience as closely as it can. What it does really well is the data. Because it rebuilds the site from your actual records, the information underneath comes through clean and complete. The look is a recreation, the data is intact. So the public site keeps working on its own. And it's not just flat pages. Here's the map browse working just like it does on the live site. You could pan it, click on a marker, jump straight to an item, and there's no Omeka behind any of it. So here's why it all matters. Picture a project running on grant money. The grant ends, the team moves on, and a year later, there's no one left to keep the Omeka site online. Normally, that's when a collection quietly disappears. But run these tools first, and it's a different story. The data is already exported and safe. The public site is still there, a folder of files with almost nothing to maintain. The project ended, the collection didn't. Together, exports and static site export are a real part of keeping your collections for the long term, but only one part. The full job is bigger than any tool. It takes regular backups, fixity checks, migration paths, and the people and funding to sustain a project. So back to where we started. If you had to move on, could your collections come with you? Now you know they can, whole and still usable, with or without Omeka. It holds your work, but never locks it in. And that's what makes it worth your trust. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. That's great. I think we're gonna hand this off to Katie.
Yes, but real quick, does anyone have questions for any of our speakers? All right. If you think of any throughout, feel free to add them to the agenda and we can put them in there later. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes here real quick. So we've now done 4 quarterly community calls. So we've completed our first year of this new initiative. That was the idea of Kim, who can't be here today, but she led the first talk on design back in December. So far we've had calls on design, archives, discovery, and today's on sustainability. So going forward, we're hoping that you all will let us know what you're interested in hearing about on these community calls. So in the chat here, I'm going to drop a survey. So the discoverability community call was based on the few comments we did receive in this form already. So we are reading this form. We are trying to shape what, as a community, we wanted to discuss. We've sort of settled in. We're getting a lot of the same folks attending these calls. So we really do want to hear from you. So I dropped the Google form in the chat, and if you all have a minute, we've dropped this a few times at the end of calls, and I think sometimes it gets lost in the last minute, sort of trying to wrap up questions. So if you don't mind, go ahead and take a few minutes and fill out this form sometime today before the end of the call so we can start planning for our next year's worth of community calls. And yeah, that's all from me, and I'm going to pass it back to Danny to introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we're going to turn to a slightly different form of sustainability. With our next speaker, it's Jillian McDonald. She is the director of the Lab for Education and Advancement in Digital Research at Michigan State University. And she's going to talk about using Omeka in the classroom. And sorry, it's a little loud in the background here. She's going to talk about using Omeka in the classroom. And yeah.
Hi, how is everyone? I'm Jillian.
Hello.
Danny just introduced. Please tell me if I'm talking too fast. I'm aware that I do have a very strong accent, so just let me know. Hi Sharon. Am I able to share my screen? Is that okay? Just 1 second.
Yes, you should be able to.
I just need to pull my thing up because I'm ready for this today. Slideshow. So 1 second. Share. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so can you see that part or just the Omeka? Okay. One of the
whole
things
part,
that I
yeah.
wanted to talk about today was the fact that we have been using Omeka in the classroom for a very long time here at Leader. So I should really tell you what Leader actually is. So this is who we are. We are the Lab for the Education and Advancement in Digital Research. We are primarily a digital pedagogy lab at Michigan State University, one of the only ones in the country. What we do primarily is implement digital skills and digital projects into the classroom and provide access to technology, digital skill sets for undergrads. And Danny and Sharon have both been a part of that in past years. But one of the main things that I would really want to talk about is how we use Omeka generally, because it's been part of what we offer, and we use it primarily for information architecture, metadata. We have concrete classroom applications of it's a public facing work. So like students buy in a lot faster, and students have a lot to say at the end of these classrooms as well. So I wanted to kind of introduce the subject of student feedback a little bit as well. But so one of the things that I will say is that we introduce students to this sort of digital methodology and how this applies to research, primarily in social science classrooms, so history, anthropology. We've kind of branched a little bit further into career readiness and things like that now as well. But we also talk to them about public-facing work and how you communicate with individuals and various audiences outside of maybe your general academic audience. So one of the things that we've noticed with working with Omeka in the classroom is that student buy-in changes when they realize that their work is going to be public rather than just a paper for a professor, and it's not getting graded or archived at any point. It's the reader could reach a historical society, local high schools, a family member, and it changes how carefully they work within that time frame as well. So instead of them being a passive consumer of historical anthropological sources, they become a curator, they become a designer, they become a creator, and they also have to provide that interpretation for future users. So they actually have buy-in. What they select matters, how they describe it matters, how they analyze it matters, and how they build an argument for a classroom assignment really frames how they all do this through an exhibit. So when we have a class that comes in to build an Omeka project, we plan for 4 workshops, and this has changed slightly since Danny was part of our team. The first generally deals with digital methods, digital sources, and how you make a digital argument. And then we sort of introduce the platform as the web versus the physical exhibit and how those two things interact with each other. So we talk about like the exhibition software, but also how do you make an exhibit come to life online in the same way. Then we'll show them examples of Omeka sites, ask them to find arguments, and talk about UX design. So Omeka is one of the only tools we've found that actually teaches information architecture as content and not as a side effect of what's going on. So when a student decides whether something belongs under a subject or a description or how to structure a collection, it supports the argument that their exhibit is making. And they're doing that structural thinking that a librarian or an archivist would do in that project. And that's a skill that most undergraduates assignments don't really teach these days. And a paper has a structure, but a student doesn't design the entire system that it lives in. So one of the things is it's teaching students information literacy and accountability at its fullest. Because it's not just can you find a good source, but can you organize that knowledge in a way that someone else can find it too, and someone else can understand what your process was. So part of that is understanding metadata, and that work is really invisible to students outside of history, essentially, and librarian sciences, because it's the thing that the librarian does behind the scenes so that a search bar works, and they don't understand how these search bars work. But Omeka itself makes it visible and it makes it their own. So they get to decide the language that's being used, the controlled vocabulary that they are going to be using for their particular exhibit. Every field is a decision. It's an interpretive decision that they have to make. And because the exhibit is public facing, these decisions are available for other people to critique. Bad metadata means a real future user cannot find or understand the item, and they recognize this in real time. And that's genuinely a different kind of accountability than a classroom paper has. So students start to understand that metadata as an act of care to whoever understands a collection and not just something that sits in the background, which is fundamentally a really important part of what we do. It also gives students digital experience without having to teach them how to code. So the other nice thing about Omeka is that the assignment is portable across subjects. It doesn't have to be a history class. It doesn't have to be an anthropology class. It can be a sociology class, an art history class. Even political science classrooms can use this in talking about cartoons or talking about how documents have been used to further campaigns or things like that. It's a very flexible software as well, which is really nice. And we've used it in a variety of different ways with a variety of different tools, as you can see here. So that public dimension is really important for us in the classroom. In history, students will work with primary sources and then they build a digital exhibit around those primary sources. They can select items, write descriptions, construct a narrative, but knowing how to do that in a digital format is a really different skill. In anthropology, they can do it with fieldwork, they can do it with material culture, they can catalogue things, building an exhibit that makes an interpretive claim about what they've collected in general and how they interpret that. But we can also implement it in different ways with geospatial data, with Omeka S, plugins like Neatline, CurateScape, Timelines, YouTube, you name it, we've done it. But these are just a few of our projects, and I'm sure they will be recognizable to at least the people that we've worked with before. So Lands and Urban Renewal is a project that studied the building of 496 and redlining, and we're actually reviving that this year for the 2026 edition. Indigenous Women was a project portfolio we did with one of the anthropology professors that deals with material culture and the idea of 4 views. So students think about an object in 4 different ways. Malcolm X in Lansing is mapping Malcolm X's Lansing journey, the community's effect on him and how he affected the community around him. And then Emily Conroy-Krutz did a really fun project on women's 19th century biographies with us. And we used the exhibit platform to talk about women's activism in the 19th century. So if anyone has any questions about how we've done this in the past or wants any resources, please let me know. But we've had a lot of fun using Omeka exhibit in the classrooms. So I guess I'll stop there.
I have immediately a question for you, Jillian, because I know that you run and oversee, because of the semester to semester turn, lots of different installations. And like, how do you think about sustainability, sunsetting, life cycle of those projects?
So generally, what we've done in the past and are continuing to do now is that projects really have a 3-year life cycle as they exist on our servers. After about 3 years, we contact the professor and say, what do you want to do with this? It needs to move off of our servers so that we have space for more future projects. And they can decide whether they want to kill it or if they want to save it, essentially. And the fact that there is now an export for a static site makes my life so much easier. So yeah, so I will be taking advantage of that. Thank you for building that. I really appreciate it. And I know I did bug you about it the last time I spoke to you. So in terms of sustainability, usually it's a 3-year life cycle here. But yeah.
That's great. And I know that folks at MSU also have a possibility, at least on the faculty end, to have a domain of one's own account that they can move their stuff off into so that it's not all in the lab. So that's a possibility that there are migration from one server to another is not a huge deal. It's
No,
just
it's
we'll
not a
have to
huge,
be willing to take responsibility for it.
yeah, because
Yeah.
we can't hold everyone's work forever.
Okay. That's great. Thanks.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Jillian. Um, guess next, let's go into our project showcase. And so our next presenter will be Svetoslav Nikolov and sharing a project about migrating a project to Omeka S.
Hello, did you hear me?
Yep.
Hi to all. First, I didn't create some presentation because I have a short time to prepare. I'm just speaking. It will be okay and will be short, I think. Hi to all. My name is Svetoslav Nikolov. I'm from Head of National Library Department of Information Support of Library Activities in Bulgaria. It's a pleasure to be here and to share with the community how we use Omeka S as a national institution and where we are taking it with Omeka S. Our digital library is built entirely on Omeka S from the ground on current version 4.2. We didn't migrate to off-the-shelf solution. We built a platform around the library's needs, and Omeka S gives us this foundation to do that. Some words on the migration project. We started from technically outdated legacy system. The process ran through extracting, structuring, and adapting metadata and digital objects, mapping to the Dublin core, and so on, transferring files with integrity check, importing, and quality control. Along the way, we also recognized the collection themselves to meet the archivist requirements. The first challenge was the database of the Oriental department. There we had multi-calendar dates, if you are aware, with Hijri, Rumi, and Gregorian calendar, Ottoman scripts, and description with no controlled vocabularies. So we built an extended custom vocabulary and specialized resource templates before importing anything on that collection. We made some custom modules for national libraries with many departments to work on a single installation. We need something as we see that Omeka S doesn't offer out of the box, so we wrote several custom modules. The most important is department access. It separates collection by departments and users. Each department sees only their own items, item sets, resource templates, and files in file sideload module. Without touching any code on Omeka S and database. The result is clean, isolated workspace for every team with the shared platform. Alongside, we have some smaller modules for automate date calendar and for handling items set thumbnails to set it automatically for one collection to be, how to say, one thumbnail for all items in the item set. The whole workflow is built on automation through the REST API provided by Omeka S, importing resource templates with Python scripts, CSV imports, module file sideload, and custom CSS for individual collection. We are in featured process to automation and enrichment our exhibit. This is the most interesting part for the feature. We are planning a pipeline for automatically enrich the collection that runs entirely locally on our own infrastructure because of the sensitivity of materials and to avoid dependence on external service. The goal is for digitized objects to enter Omeka S already carrying suggested metadata and to be searchable by meaning, not by the keywords. In front of that, we face some partnership beyond the library. Our experience is already reaching how to say, beyond our walls, in a partnership with American College in Sofia. We are taking part in our project to digitize their historical archives. They have this grants in USA, AFCP Freedom 250, and they have this kind of agreement with USA, and for us, we will build the installation of Omeka S project and digitize their photographs, official documents, cartographics materials, and the other stuff. In short, how to say, we begin with a migration from an outdated system, built a multi-department access module, and today we are moving Omeka S towards the local AI pipeline for enrichment and, let's say, some international projects as we start. Thank you. That is for me in short.
Well, thank you very much for sharing. We really appreciate that. Yeah, it looks like we're slightly ahead of time, which I think is just fine since we always have quite a few questions to answer. So still as we go, if you want to add any more to our document, you can also put them in the chat, but of course on the agenda, then we get to record them and hold on to them. But yeah, how do we feel about jumping into discussion and questions? Good. All right. Let's go ahead and start with Christian's question. He's asking, nearly 25% of Omeka S modules have the same author, Daniel KM, an awesome dev and a really kind person. Many of them being very popular and having become systemic components in numerous installations worldwide. How do the Omeka team manage this situation when planning future developments?
That's a hard and complicated question, and I'm actually gonna turn to the person sitting next to me, John, to answer that question since he manages that roadmap making and decision making.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting question. So right, I mean, I think we covered a little before in how we've talked in this meeting about, the tons of modules that we make, obviously. I don't know what percent we're at, but
We're like, we were for a long time, we were at 50%. We have now dropped below 50%.
all right, well, that's good.
Yeah, it is good. It is good.
So yes, obviously we're aware that Daniel's got a lot of modules and that a lot of people use them like, as sort of as a matter of course, right? So to some extent, what we do is we don't do anything. That's part of what we do is that, obviously the nature of modules and module development by external people is that, it's independent of us, which is the point, is so that people can do things that we don't have interest in or that we want to do in a different way or whatever. So to some extent, this is just like, it's good that, this is out there and that they're popular and that they're supported. Obviously there's this part where like so many people are using them and they become, as this says, what did this say, systemic. So that like affects us in some ways that like you can't be totally independent. So one is that we have to take notice of some of this, right? So when we're making changes, we need to, it depends on what we're talking about, but obviously we don't want to go in there, even though this is independent and then it's not us, we don't want to create work for Daniel to be like, okay, now you have to make all these changes. So like, not just Daniel's modules, obviously, but just anyone's modules, we want to work, when we're making updates and improvements and things, or like we're taking a feature that is a module now, and then like there's going to be a version of it in the core. We always have to be thinking about like, okay, what's going to be the move for people who are doing this as a module and who are writing the module? Like, are we making this easier for them or are we making it harder for them? So that's part of it. And I think the other part that kind of really affects our development is where do we need to look at, a feature, either a feature in the core that does what the module does, or like does what some people, feel they need a module for. That sometimes makes sense, like I think, bringing it back to sustainability, ideally you want to use less modules, I would say, it's going to be more sustainable. Obviously, you need to do what you need to do, and the project is the project, but in that limitation, being able to do that with as few moving parts as possible is going to be the easiest to sort of like deal with at the active phase, at the inactive phase. So do we need to provide features? And obviously sometimes, it doesn't make sense for us to do a feature for everything, but do we need to provide, are there places, sometimes we've done this where, do we need to provide a place for like modules to go into and add to things so that, you know, modules are really powerful in Omeka. So they can do kind of anything. And so sometimes what happens is like we don't have kind of a pathway for something to happen in a nice way. So a module will come in and do it in like a very maximal way, or a way that's kind of using a sledgehammer maybe in a nice way, a nice sledgehammer. So that sometimes the kind of things that we need to look at doing are like providing pathways for modules to make changes that themselves are a little more, limited, that we kind of channel in a certain way or whatever. So I think that's basically the places where this kind of thing comes up. Yeah.
Good. Excellent. What's our next
Okay,
question, Danny?
for that. Oh yeah. Our next question is also from Christian, and it's asking an increasing number of contributions to open source CMS platforms are being produced using vibe coding with the help of AI agents. Floods of generated code become a major issue for maintainers and do not follow ethical principles. WordPress added AI guidelines to encourage transparency and responsibility. Drupal devs are debating on banning LLM contributions from Drupal core. What are the thoughts of the Omeka team about this threat?
It's a great question, and it's a complicated one. And I think we are certainly in discussions. We have had sort of in the module universe, we don't do a lot of oversight about modules, but every once in a while we're like, yeah, this thing, we can tell this is completely built by AI and it doesn't really work, and so we don't register it. But we don't actually do a lot of checking on that front. But we have talked about needing to preemptively develop standards. We're not getting a ton of, correct me if I'm wrong, John, we're not getting a ton of pull requests that are wholesale vibe coded.
Yeah, no, I think there have been some.
Some.
We are not having like the flood that some projects have yet. I mean, maybe we won't ever, but we're not currently. Where like volume is one of the big problems for a lot of these, right? Where it's just so easy to make requests and it's so easy to, make modules and do all these things. So we're not seeing that yet. But right, I think like Sharon says, more at a considering phase. I'm assuming, yeah, like probably whatever we end up at, I'm assuming we're more, like this Christian's question talks about like transparency,
Yeah.
the WordPress side. Almost certainly that's, I mean,
Yeah.
Difficult to really set that as a rule, but in terms of like
It's a community standard.
as a principle, I
Yeah.
assume that's probably, in general the kind of place that we are versus like bans. But obviously the answers to all these things are very dependent on like where this goes in the future, both with LLMs, which are obviously changing all the time, and our personal current experience with it. So right now we're in this place where we can afford to sort of take it slow and kind of see how things decide for ourselves and see how things go. And hopefully we'll still be in that situation and then we won't have like
Yes.
a crisis of a flood or whatever that we have to deal with, where we have to make more immediate decisions. But yeah, it's definitely something that we're thinking about. I don't know that we have anything. I don't think we have anything.
We don't have anything
say to
drafted yet and those sorts of things, but I think, it's a viable conversation to have on the forums about sort of, maybe taking WordPress's guidelines as just something to reflect on. Does that, make sense? Do some of those things make sense for us as a community or not? But it's an open conversation we should be having as a community.
Yeah. Bringing it back to sustainability again, it's like a double-edged sword, right? The whole LLM situation. When you're thinking about modules, especially, maybe like it's way easier for somebody to make something and then just sort of set it and forget it and put it out in the world and leave, which, not ideal sustainability wise. But then maybe it's easier for people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to go and update something, to go and change something. So like where that evens out, oof, I don't know.
Okay, because we're running a little out of time, so let's do some speed answering questions.
Yeah.
The next one is from Chad at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, and he's looking for some community feedback. He's thinking about, he manages several unique installations with more on the horizon. So, how do you manage to update and schedule for multiple installs? Is there a best time interval? What have you used to maybe automate this?
Anyone?
And this one can be open to anyone.
And if you don't feel comfortable speaking on the call, you can also feel free to answer it in the agenda document.
Yeah. Or in the chat.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
well,
we'll have
so
the chat and everything recorded for everyone as well.
yeah, yeah. So the idea, the conversation that's happening in the chat about making this a larger conversation is certainly good.
Mm.
Svetlana, do
Yeah.
you want to chime in?
And yeah,
Yes. For the question about how to maintain a lot of Omeka S installation, in my cases, it's better to, in my cases, we just make a documentation, which, because we made a lot of custom solution on the Omeka S, and we have to care them when we try to upgrade to a new system. And at least it should be a virtual machine, make some snapshots, backups before do whatever you want to do with your system. That's it.
Yeah.
Our solution.
Okay. John, you and Ken manage the upgrade and migration of all of our hosted instances. Do you have any, do you guys have any advice from that end of things?
Yeah, we're pretty automation light on how that stuff works. We do have some stuff that's not, like just downloading, because usually for us, if we're updating things like kind of to the latest versions. So just like simply kind of going out to GitHub and, taking the list of modules that they have and just downloading new versions of all of them, replacing all the modules that are in there with all the new ones. We've got, is kind of where our process is. On the sort of outside of our specific, situation, there's another one of these ones I don't have like specific things to share. There's certainly talk about this like within the core and some changes that in some sense are going to come in with, like, for example, you can already kind of do this a little bit today, but like expanding the ability to do this to use Composer. So thinking in the Omeka S world anyway about getting your modules and getting your themes and like versions of those and specifying them and running a command to grab all the new ones rather than needing a separate thing. So that's definitely a potential component here. I don't want to go on too long.
Possibly in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, not
thinking about it. So the next question, I'm just going to zip on ahead because it's an easy question to answer. And that is about the status of Neatline for Omeka S. The Neatline project has been handed off from the folks at UVA to Performant, which is an independent development agency that works on open source software. They have made no updates in 5 years to what was the grant-funded version of Neatline for Omeka S. I suspect in the future there will be no additional development. It is just not going to happen. You can bug them. It is possible to find Performant on GitHub and on the web and say, what is happening. But I suspect that it is actually not, it's not going to happen. As a result of that, we have done our best to slowly incorporate as many as we can of the features from Neatline into mapping for Omeka S. So you're starting to see, you're seeing lines, polygons, those sorts of things, sequencing, and we're trying to pick up as much of the slack as we can while still building something that we feel comfortable about maintaining. All right.
I like these ones that are questions that are kudos.
Yes,
I like kudos.
we're
based.
reading the agenda and it's saying nice, happy things, which we always appreciate. So that's great. Okay. All right, Danny, what do we have here?
I think we are,
We're at time?
yeah, we're at time. I think we can wrap it up for now. And I will remind everybody, please fill out, especially now that we're thinking up already an idea for the next community call, which could be sustainability, or management, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
installation
Um,
management. Yeah, I think
yeah.
that's a good.
Yeah, it's like if any other ideas you can think of, I'm sure because I think we're seeing from the chat right now that everyone kind of has some of the same questions. And so if you have a question or something you want to focus on, add that into the survey that Katie shared earlier because we would love to get everyone's feedback and it'll help us plan for the next year and the next one and all of that in the future. But in the meantime, thank you all very much. This has been wonderful. I also have learned a lot today and just was reminded of some stuff. And so thank you all.
All right. Thanks, everyone.